Industry 4.0, Jordan Crenshaw, Vice President, U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Here he comes with coffee in his hand. Round of applause.
Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be in Austin, which I think actually is leading the country in tech. Don't tell the West Coast I said that, but my name is Jordan Crenshaw. I'm Vice President of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Technology Engagement Center. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce is the world's or nation's leading trade association. We represent 300,000 companies directly and 3 million indirectly through our local and state chamber network. In my role at CTech, I lead our technology policy division, which is designed to tell the benefits and the story of technology improving the lives of Americans, but also to advocate for rational policy solutions. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about Industry 4.0, or the fourth industrial revolution, as we're currently beginning to see. And as I thought about the fourth industrial revolution, and you're going to see a lot of these examples throughout the conference over the next few days, but when we're talking about smart cities, smart manufacturing, when I started thinking about the fourth industrial revolution, I started thinking back to a movie I recently just saw, in which I saw some themes getting played on this, and this was, I don't know who's seen Top Gun, Maverick, but I'm not going to give any spoilers or anything like that. But one of the themes of it was, with Tom Cruise and the older fighter pilots, could they compete with automation? And could they compete with next generation technology? And it really got me thinking in terms of how do we view Industry 4.0? How do we deal with the issues surrounding it? Do we take the mindset of, from a policy perspective, do we recognize that we have the need for speed? Or do we have the mindset of that technology is going to lead us down the information highway to the danger zone? And so, you know, I think that I'm a tech optimist, and I actually believe that the technology in Industry 4.0 is going to be a good thing, but we're going to have to combat a lot of the voices out there that are trying to push back against the development of technology. You know, I think a few examples to note of what Industry 4.0 can really do. For example, first of all, it's going to help out with manufacturing on a variety of levels. For example, think smart robotics and smart arms, not only being instructed what to do in terms of manufacturing, but also at the same time being able to connect back and talk about how they're going to have to be maintained and also be proactive in their own maintenance. You know, I think other things to think about outside the broader context of just manufacturing, for example, smart cities with sensors, smart cities with autonomous vehicles are going to help increase inclusivity and provide mobility to parts of society and groups that have been underrepresented for years. It's also going to help out with environmentalism and making sure that we cut down on emissions by making sure that our transportation systems are more efficient in how they operate. If you look at things like the medical sector, technologies like artificial intelligence are actually going to help identify things like cancers much earlier on in the diagnosis phase because the computers basically have had the ability to look at different records and really determine, based on a quicker algorithm, if a patient may have cancer or not. And so other things I could name as well, too. Autonomous vehicles I mentioned, but drones also, for example, were talked about a little bit earlier, that they're helping deliver pharmaceuticals to areas that are harder to reach, and also making infrastructure safer so that we can start identifying problems in hard-to-reach infrastructure so you know, workers don't have to put themselves in dangerous situations unnecessarily. And so there is a great benefit to seeing this new fourth industrial revolution. What's powering it? Well, a couple things. You need data, which is the lifeblood of the 21st century economy. You need connectivity to make sure that that data gets transmitted from one place to the other. And you also need that brain power as well, too, and you need the computing capacity to make sure that this new revolution works, and that's through things like AI, quantum computing, and without those three, it's going to be hard to really see the benefits achieved of the new 21st century digital economy and this fourth industrial revolution. And one of the things that we looked at the U.S. Chamber, for example, we actually, as part of this fourth industrial revolution, are looking at artificial intelligence, for example. And, you know, as I said before, there are naysayers who want to shut down the technology or overprotect, and then there are tech optimists, which I lean more on that side as well. But we want to make sure that we get policy right. And what we did is we formed the Artificial Intelligence Commission on Competition, Inclusion, and Innovation. And this commission, led by former Congressmen John Delaney and Mike Ferguson, with industry and academic experts, is designed to develop policy solutions in really three key areas. How do we deal with the ethics and regulation of data and AI? How do we prepare the workforce to get ready for what could come? Because that's one of the major pushbacks we're hearing is that tech is going to replace workers. And finally, how do we compete internationally, especially against nations that may not share our Western democratic values and personal liberties? And a couple things I think are interesting to note. What we know is that $16 trillion of economic activity is expected to come from just AI alone by 2030. And 70% of companies are going to employ AI by that time frame. We did some of our own research too. Nearly a quarter of small businesses are already identifying that they use AI. That is a major number to show how ingrained this technology is being used. But, you know, a couple other things we need to look at as well too. I mentioned, you know, those three areas. How do we deal with the ethics? There are a lot of issues out there regarding how do we deal with high-risk AI? How do we deal with low-risk AI? Some of the things that we heard during the commission were that we need to make sure that we don't stunt growth by having companies ask for permission from government every time they want to develop artificial intelligence or a new technology. Any of these different proposals on tech policy need to be risk-based. They need to be dealing with high risk and not dealing with situations in which problematic uses of AI are at play. Some of the other interesting things too, like in our AI commission, we heard, for example, how do we deal with ethics with things like a national security perspective? For example, one of the things we heard from some high-level folks in the security space, how do you deal with artificial intelligence making decisions in the age of hypersonics, for example, when you only have a matter of 5 to 10 minutes to make strategic or tactical decisions? Do you employ AI or do you have to have a human there? These are questions we have to take a look at as well. And finally, I think some of the things that we've found too is that one of the chief complaints about AI, for example, is the potential for bias. You know, we do know, for example, that there are some races that do tend to have bias against them when it comes to things like facial recognition. What we have learned, though, at the same time, is that technology and data can also help improve bias, and we don't want to make sure that we don't have data cut off that could be valuable to improving and taking the bias out of technology. The other area is workforce. I think there's a lot of concern from some of the tech naysayers that say that this is going to take jobs away. I'm not so convinced that's going to be the case. One of the things that we actually found out from even some of the labor unions that we actually had come participate and testify at our commission was that they're not really that concerned about the workforce implications of AI, in that they don't expect mass job loss. One of the things I think they have concerns about, though, are managerial decisions being made by AI and by algorithms. And I think that may be the bigger issue at play right there. And at the same time, when it comes to workforce, AI can be a force for good in things like talent pipeline management, in which algorithms will pair up education status to needs of companies. And I think that's also something we need to look at as one of the many positives, even though there are some talk about negatives when it comes to AI. The other issue, too, also is how do we compete globally with this technology? We know that China and Russia have both agreed to work together on technology like artificial intelligence and establish world dominance in this space. And I think there are things that we have to make sure that we're very cognizant of as we're going forward. One of the things that we learned was that we in the United States are being out-patented 3-to-1 by China when it comes to artificial intelligence. A lot of that is through IP theft in a way, but one of the biggest counterbalances to that, you know, in terms of how do we combat that, we need strong IP laws, but at the same time, we need good research and development to stay ahead of the curve. And without research and development, we are not going to maintain our leadership in the United States in technology. And I think one of the stats that was the most alarming, when you look at the space race in 1965, the public sector contributed about 2/3 of funding to basic research and development in the United States. You compare that to now, it's only 1/3. And it's for that reason we need a robust research and development ecosystem in which we have a thriving public sector R&D space, but also private sector so that they can work on the applications of what is developed in the public sector. I think one of the things that we have noticed, though, recently and are appreciative of is the fact that the CHIPS and Science Act passed the United States Congress and was signed into law. That is going to help address many of these issues in terms of creating key technology focus areas that the government will begin looking at funding for. We need to get that funding out so that we can begin to develop research and development in areas like quantum, 5 and 6G, and areas like AI, edge computing, and other areas like that as well in the tech space. So that's also something that we need to make sure gets done right, but is implemented as quickly and efficiently as possible, is the CHIPS and Science Act. I want to get into some of the other areas, though, when it comes to tech, outside of what we learned with AI. And I mentioned you need the brain power of computing, you need data, and you need connectivity. And one of the things that we've found out at the U.S. Chamber, we recently did a report on tech's impact on small business, and that small businesses across the country, 8 in 10 of them said if any of their access to data was limited, it would harm their business operations. These same small businesses said that without tech, they would not have survived or grown during the pandemic. And this is everything from AI to Square to social media to all different types of technology, business-to-business software platforms. Without access to those, small business would not have been able to survive the last years, even the ones that did. And I think that's an important number to note. And I think as we look at the policy landscape right now, there are a lot of places where I think we're very concerned that access to data could dry up for the economy at large. Currently, 2 areas that come to mind. The first is that there is privacy legislation that's currently going through the United States House that passed out of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, and this is the American Data Privacy and Protection Act. We at the U.S. Chamber want to see a national privacy law passed that protects all Americans equally, that provides concrete protections and certainty for industry and for consumers alike. But we want to make sure we get that right. And here's some concerns I have about this legislation, is that it really is designed to take on big tech, but in reality regulates every company that uses tech throughout the country. And I think that's one of the things that our legislators need to take a look at and make sure that when they're developing privacy legislation, it's got to work for everyone in this room and be operable and not just be about legislating and regulating 2 or 3 tech companies out in Silicon Valley. That's important here for a variety of reasons. This legislation would potentially make companies exposed to private lawsuits, which will inhibit innovation. A couple of things, as I mentioned, on artificial intelligence. It's going to require companies to go in and do impact assessments on what's considered to be substantial consequential activity when it comes to AI. That term isn't defined, so you're going to have lawyers figure that out. In fact, the bill doesn't even define artificial intelligence, which we're still trying to figure that out in terms of a good legal standpoint. And then finally, I think one of the concerns here is that this bill would cut off access to what's defined as sensitive personal information. Well, that could be anything that's in a camera in terms of defining geolocation in a security camera to the personal information about someone who's in a connected car, for example. And I think what's problematic about this is the Federal Trade Commission under this bill could actually define what is sensitive, thereby cutting off access to data without even Congress having a say in the matter. And then finally, the Federal Trade Commission itself is undergoing a very broad rulemaking on algorithms, privacy, and security. They've asked 95 questions, basically asking if they could regulate the entire economy at large without a single congressional vote. I think that's a problem. When it comes to data as well, too, we need to make sure when it comes to things like artificial intelligence, we expand access to data, open up data, have open data sets that make AI much more precise in how it makes decisions. When it comes to things like autonomous vehicles, for example, we need a national standard. That's also something that's critically important. If we're testing and developing things like autonomous trucks across state lines, we need one single clear set of rules of the road that can enable this fourth industrial revolution technology to get across the finish line. I also mentioned we're still dealing with the shortages of semiconductors as a result of the pandemic and demand. We're happy to have seen the passage of the CHIPS and Science Act, which means we're now going to see over $50 billion inserted into the economy to try to get semiconductor fab plants up and running. And there's also now new tax incentives there, but we need to make sure that we start getting that money out as efficiently and effectively as possible. Then also two other areas too. I just want to mention, government needs to digitize. For us to get into an effective Industry 4.0 environment, we need collaboration between government and the private sector. Government digitization has woefully lagged behind the private sector. I think one example I would mention, back during the height of the pandemic, because of poor record keeping, there was nearly $7 million of personal protective equipment that was left to rot in the rain in San Mateo County, California, because no one was keeping track of it. If we had digitized, if we had gotten government funded with the right funding it needed on a federal, state, and local level, we can make open data sets more efficient for industry to work with, and at the same time, too, we can make government work better for citizens. One of the things we did at the Chamber is we helped get started the new IT Modernization Caucus on Capitol Hill, led by Congressman Issa and Connolly. And their job is going to be going out throughout the country and also in Congress, educating about the need for governments to modernize and beef up. And that's through things like injecting more money into the Technology Modernization Fund that's out there for federal spending. But there are other opportunities, too, that I think would be great to let your elected leaders know about as well, state and local, is there is American Rescue Plan funding out there. That bill already passed earlier on in this Congress, and that money can be used by states to modernize and digitize. And so I would highly encourage, if you're talking to your elected leaders on a state and local level, to let them know that this funding is out there and the real need there as well, too. And finally, we also, as I said before, this data has to be talked to between systems. We need good connectivity. We were happy to see in the bipartisan infrastructure bill that came out a couple months ago that there was funding for broadband service, but we need to make sure that we get that broadband funding to the areas of the country that need it the most, and I'm talking rural America, for deploying broadband, and then also working on affordability in areas of the country, specifically urban areas that are having issues with affordability. So those are a lot of things I've talked through in terms of some policy recommendations that need to be made to get America across the finish line, to get to where we need to be to lead in this fourth industrial revolution. But I am one of those folks who believes that we can actually lead in this space without the dangers that some of the naysayers are saying. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and looking forward to the rest of the conference.